Greetings collectors and welcome to today's show. Picture the scene, it's the 1980s. Harrison Ford has played Han Solo in Star Wars, Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now it's 1982 and it's his time to play bounty hunter Rick Deckard in Ridley Scott's sci-fi classic Blade Runner. The late 70s and early 80s were a time when Ford's career was well and truly on an upswing. This was also a time when we saw a real-life rise of the machines. Video games were now not just on the sidelines creeping into our society. Characters such as Pac-Man and the sound of approaching space invaders were recognisable around the world. The 80s saw what was essentially a slightly geeky hobby for enthusiasts reach the mainstream. This meant a shift in the way that the games industry operated. It meant potentially a wide audience which would ultimately lead to higher profits. Although movie franchise games such as Atari's E.T. had left a sour taste in the mouth of consumers, this didn't mean that we had turned away completely from the lure of movie-to-game conversions. A Ridley Scott Harrison Ford sci-fi thriller was a surefire way to win the interest of gamers back. There was one problem though, licensing. Whereas the rights to E.T.'s image and properties had been licensed to Atari, this was not so for Blade Runner. This becomes apparent on the very cover of the game box. The name Blade Runner is there, which is a good start, but you'll notice the lack of any movie-related imagery. The game has the tagline, "A video game interpretation of the film's score by Vangelis." When I read this, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. Surely a video game interpretation of a film score is a very bizarre concept. I can picture interpretation of a film, but just not of the score alone. It turns out that this was a way of getting around licensing issues. Rather than interpret the film, interpret the music. To be honest, I'm not sure that wouldn't land you in court one way or another, but it seemed to be okay. I'm not sure if this was a legal loophole or Warner Brothers Studios just let this one pass under the radar. Either way, we ended up with an unlicensed game. Always intriguing too is the promise of a free poster. I always get that warm fuzzy collector's feeling when I see that on older games. Not to go into too much detail about the film, but it's worth setting the scene. Essentially, a set of androids known as replicants have revolted against their human masters. As such, a bounty hunter must track them down and eliminate them. That's the massively reduced version. In fact, the film is a brilliantly deep study of humanity, our social structures, reliance on technology, and what it means to be human. For the sci-fi fans out there, you will know that this is based on the 1968 novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. As with many of the author's works, it paints a slightly bleak dystopian view of the future of humanity. Not so bleak though is the contents of the box. There's a well-presented cassette and a slip of paper that functions as both the game manual on one side and a t-shirt offer on the other. Talk about cashing in. Still, $4.95 including postage and packaging for a Blade Runner game t-shirt seems a good deal. If you have one of these, please let me know. I'm looking to make a video game extras episode at some point, and I'd really like to see one of these. Here's what we all came for though, the poster. Is it also an interpretation of the film score? Well, it actually looks very much more like one of the scenes from the film, as the bounty hunter tracks down one of the replicants. Although I can see that the hovering taxi is in MP3 format. There's also a nice cameo of CRL computer troubleshooters. This guy looks so annoyed. So, let's fire this one up. I'm a big fan of the Commodore 64 screechy loading screens, and this one is particularly screechy. If you were born after 1990, this is what you were missing. The actual title screen is fairly bland, but what is great here is the soundtrack. It reminds me of an interpretation of the film score. Wait a minute. Yes, the developers really did get this right. This is definitely from the film score. After defining your keys, it's onto the Overworld Map. You are represented by the yellow dot, whilst the Repladroids, yes that's Repladroids rather than replicants, are represented by the red indicators. Higher tier Repladroids are represented by the blue indicators. Simply move to an area in the city where the Repladroid is and press fire to begin your pursuit. From here on in we have a nice music change and the hunt begins. there's a few key components here. Firstly, the pursuit scanner. This is your heads up on how close you are to the Reploid. You are represented by the blue square and the target by the green square. There's also a bonus pot that depletes as the chase continues, so fast kills are desirable. The aim here is to chase and kill the Reploid. It sounds simple, but it's much harder than it first appears. The pavement is covered by waves of people, and the road is a death trap with passing buses. You must skillfully navigate through both to catch up with the target. It's then a case of getting directly lined up behind the target and pulling fire. The reason this is so difficult is because the target runs directly into the pedestrians. Run into one of these and you'll lose bags of time. Also, getting a clear shot off is almost impossible at some points, as the same pedestrians seem to want to block your way. Picking your time to strike is essential and can lead to some very long pursuits. On gaining a kill, you score a point in the bottom right of the screen. After 4 of these, you can go after a higher level Reploid. After that, it's track down a replicant, chase, kill, and then back to the overworld. Magazines at the time really didn't take to this game too well at all, with most with review scores that were really quite low. I'm a little split on this one. In terms of the negative, the game is very repetitive and the main action sequences can be a real chore to catch and kill the target. Considering the scope of the film's action scenes and depth, more could possibly have been done here. However, this is set up as an interpretation of the film's score, so I could be expecting too much. In terms of the positive, the soundtrack is excellent. Say what you want about the gameplay, but the developers did deliver on an authentic soundtrack. As you hit the overworld, the C64 SID chip really delivers the nice 1980s sci-fi vibe. In terms of packaging, well, if grey is your thing, then you're going to love this one. Nothing to shout about here. The poster is a nice extra though. So, is Blade Runner worth collecting? If I was asked before I saw the price, I would say yes, for a small hit of fun, it's an okay experience. I then did my routine trip to eBay to see what recent prices were. I was expecting to see the usual bargain bin prices of around £2. Shockingly though, a complete in-box edition of this game has been selling for around £20 recently. That's close to $30 US. The element that seems to push up the price here is the nature of an unlicensed game that goes hand in hand with the publisher CRL. The company made only a handful of games and some were given a 15+ certificate, including the text adventure games Dracula and Frankenstein, for their use of on-screen blood. Based on the high collecting price, I'm not sure that I can recommend this one to you unless you're a really big Blade Runner completionist or a collector of the CRL series. For what it is, Blade Runner on the Commodore 64 is acceptable if you can get your head around the repetition and the difficult game chase mechanics. I'm pleased to have this one in my collection. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but hopefully worth a public airing. Have you played Blade Runner, and more importantly, did you own the t-shirt? Let me know in the comments. Hello again, I hope you enjoyed today's show, and thank you for the view. Remember, you can always comment, like, subscribe, and find us on the social media sites below. Happy collecting!